Really excited to be here to share with you really everything that we do. It won't be everything, but a lot of what we do here at the athletic department when it comes to developing and building mental strength. I like to call myself a human performance psychologist. I specialize in neuroplasticity, which really is the wiring or rewiring of our brain. A lot of times I'll tell people, they'll ask me what I do, and I say, well, I wire intelligence. And then their next question is, oh, so you're an electrician, you work in homes, you wire smart homes. And I have to say, nope, that's actually not it. I help people wire their brains, right? Like Ben said, I'm here full-time at BYU. I work with the athletic department, and because I'm really passionate about sports psychology and developing mental strength, we founded a technology company called Motivate, which really is a technology-based mental strength training program. We started last summer, but we have hundreds of players and teams that have kind of joined us to start building mental strength. To help kick off, I got to tell you my story and really how I fell in love with sports psychology. It started through my own sport experience. So I grew up, I played all sports in high school, but I came to BYU and I ran on the track team a long time ago. More specifically, I was a pole vaulter. And so you can already see why I would like the mind. I was missing a few nuts and bolts upstairs, and so I wanted to figure out how do I fix that, right? So came to BYU, ran track. I was a pole vaulter. I was a very mid-level guy, very average. I did all of the things physically. I would be on the track. I'd be in the weight room. We would go and train in the pool, in the gymnastics room, and I did everything I could possibly think of physically to become my best and develop as an athlete. And what I found is I was still performing poorly. I would go out in the pole vault world. If you go and jump and you miss all three of your first attempts, like height, you get worse than last place. I would do that a lot, and that was really frustrating. And so I just wasn't performing the way I wanted to perform. And so I luckily got introduced to Dr. Craig Manning, who's also here at BYU, but at the time he was the women's tennis coach. And so I went over, I started talking to Craig, and he had just finished his PhD in sports psychology with Keith Henshin up at Utah. And I said, teach me everything you know. And I started to apply a lot of the mental skills and build the mental strengths. And what happened for me was quite transformative. I went from being a mid-level average jumper to an NCAA All-American. I went to 6 national championships, and I went on to have a 3-year professional career chasing the 2012 London Olympic Games. Those were experiences and things I'd only dreamed of as a kid, right? And so to do all the things physically and then to add in the mental side of the game and then see my performance really excel was fun for me to experience. That's what really led me to fall in love with sports psychology. We moved our family out to Missouri. I got a PhD in sport performance psychology, and since then have been on this mission to help others, athletes, coaches, parents, even just people, develop the mental strengths to help them unlock their performance and perform the way they want to perform, right? So excited to be here and share with you what we do here. So I'm just going to give you the takeaways up front, and then we'll show this again at the end. We're going to talk about wiring proactive intelligence and how that unlocks our performance. We're going to talk about how you can control your mind by choosing the words you place in your conscious mind, right? We're going to talk about the first mental strength. There's actually 8 of them. We're going to talk about the first one, which is learning and self-belief. And then I'm going to give you some tools and some skills to start to build that self-belief, okay? Are we ready? So how do we wire intelligence? In order to really do this, we got to understand some of the neuroscience of the brain. So I'm going to try and kind of navigate through this and not put anybody to sleep. I know we just had lunch, so I'm expecting that lunch hangover just to hit us. But hopefully we can get through this. Your brain one of the things that's fun about neuroscience is over the last few years, well, really last 20 or 30 years, we've learned that your brain isn't fixed. It actually is malleable. It can grow. It can develop. And really, it kind of looks like this. This is an oversimplified image, but inside of your brain, you have these connections, these networks. Each of those circles represents a neuron, and the line between them represents a pathway, a neural pathway that connects them together, right? So it's a giant electrical grid. As we have thoughts, every time we have experience emotions, every time we do a behavior or an action, these neural pathways, you can see them in green there, they start to grow. They start to grow. They get thicker, right? And they develop, and they actually become our behaviors. They become habits. Another easy way to think about it is these become roads in our mind. They start out as like really small walking paths, then they turn into a bike path, then they turn into a dirt road, then they turn into essentially a superhighway where our neurons are communicating with each other, right? Now, as we develop new skills, as we learn new skills, these other neural pathways start to fire and they start to grow. And these well-traveled superhighway neural pathways start to fade away. And so that's what happens in the brain. So literally throughout your life, you're constantly reconstructing or rewiring your brain as you learn new things. Believe it or not, 40% of the world, on average, believes that their intelligence is fixed or limited, right? So you grow up to a certain point, and then you can no longer learn new skills. You can no longer develop more intelligence. The other 40%, what research tells us is the other 40% believes that you can. A lot of this research comes from Carol Dweck out of Stanford University. She did with students in schools. The other 20% must still be out to lunch. I don't know where they're at. But what the neuroscience is telling us is that our brains are plastic. This is called neuroplasticity. And they grow and they develop and they change over time. Let me illustrate this a little bit further and tell you a story about my dad. So some of the earliest research, if you go back in the history of psychology, actually the earliest research on neuroscience happened, and it really was kind of unexplainable, but you may have heard of the story of Phineas Gage. He was a railroad worker, placing railroad ties, put some dynamite in the ground, put a railroad tie in there. It exploded, went right through his head. He didn't even know it happened. Walked away from the event, eventually walked to the hospital and was like, I have a giant hole in my head. And what they learned was that his personality changed because of the injury. He went from being this mild-mannered, calm, pretty jovial guy to a mean, angry, frustrated guy. I probably would become angry if a rod went through my head like that, but that was kind of one of the first experiences. And then they started to study rats and monkeys, and they would intentionally like cut off their fingers and find that the brain would reorganize itself. Some of the biggest advances actually came with stroke patients. So for those of you who don't know what a stroke is, a blood clot makes it into your brain, and it literally blocks blood flow from getting to that part of the brain, and that part of the brain turns off. So I'll tell you a story about my dad. My dad, in his later years, this is what happened to him. He had a stroke, and before that, he was a great track and field athlete. He also ran here at BYU as a 400 hurdler. But what most people don't know is he was an amazing pianist. In fact, we'd play this game where I would try to give him a song that would stump him, that would try to that he couldn't play. And he had this amazing perfect pitch and ear, and he could just listen to the song once or twice and then play it all the way through. It was a gift. It was a skill that he had learned playing the piano. But as some of you know, from a stroke, right, depending on where that blood clot goes, it will either turn off the right side of your body or turn off the left side of your body. So for him, it actually turned off the left side of his body. So he lost all ability to move his left arm and his left hand initially. But one of the things we learned through research with stroke patients is that you actually can reorganize your brain. So a good example of this would be, blood clot comes in here, turns that part of the brain off, right? Let's say it's mobility to use your left hand. But you still have in your mind, for my dad, right, the ability to play the piano, right? All of that memory is stored and still in there, right? And so through training and exercises and mental exercises, the brain will actually reorganize itself and rewire in the ability to move your left hand again. And so initially my dad was pretty depressed, pretty frustrated because he had lost the gift that brought him tons and tons of joy, right? The ability to play the piano. But I got to meet with him, and luckily I'd been far enough along in my training and education to be able to share with him, like, hey, this is what we know about the brain, and if you're willing to do the work, we can reorganize it, program it, and you can develop movement in your left hand. And eventually, it took him about 3 years, but eventually he developed the ability to play the piano again with his left hand. Now, it wasn't as good as it was before, because if you imagine, he had decades of training to develop the mobility and the skills in his left hand, that now we had to start over, right? But that's how the brain works. This is neuroplasticity in action. So let's dig a little bit deeper and start to talk about how we can control and choose our thoughts and control our mind, right? But we have to dig a little bit deeper. So there's two parts of the brain. Well, there's lots of parts of the brain, but two main parts. There's the conscious mind and the subconscious mind. Let's talk about the subconscious mind right here. The subconscious mind is basically 90% of your brain, and it's a giant storage bank. It just stores memory. Most of our habits and our behaviors are stored here. A lot of your kind of daily automatic thinking patterns are stored in your subconscious right here. Now, your subconscious is designed intentionally to create efficiencies, right? So as we do patterns over and over and over, it stores in our memory, and then it makes it so that those patterns become automatic, right? It's designed that way to conserve energy, because all of our thinking consumes energy, okay? Does that make sense? Everybody following me there? The conscious mind is what you're actively thinking. That sends messages to your memory, to your subconscious mind, which then sends messages to your body, gives the body instructions, right? Go do this thing, okay? All right, now let's talk more about the conscious mind. This part of our brain is our active thinking. It's what you're consciously thinking. It's where decision-making happens. It's a lot of what we're consciously thinking. Now, let's talk a little bit about this. This part of our brain can only handle one thought at a time. It can handle lots of thoughts in rapid succession, really, really fast, but really only one thought at a time. This part of the brain is also super objective. What that means is it doesn't really understand do's and don'ts, and it doesn't really understand what's helpful and what's harmful in terms of a thinking pattern. All it understands is whatever you put here, I'm going to send a signal to the subconscious, we're going to store it as memory, and then we're going to tell the body what to do, right? So what does that look like in sport? Well, as a pole vaulter, for me, if I stood at the end of the runway and was about to take a jump, and I said, don't miss this jump, and then I ran down the runway, what usually happened? Well, I'd miss the jump, right? Works the same in golf. Don't hit it in the water. I do that all the time. But the biggest piece there is the brain doesn't really understand the do or the don't part, right? It just hears the action part of the word, then stores it, then tells the body, go and do that thing, right? It also doesn't understand if a thought or a thinking pattern is harmful or helpful. So if you have really negative or bad thinking patterns, all it hears is, oh, Bobby's saying those words. Bobby, I should store that, so now I'm going to tell the body what to do, right? So it doesn't know that don't miss this jump or don't hit that ball in the water. It doesn't know that that's a harmful thought, right? Now, what's amazing about this part of the brain is you can control this part of the brain. You can choose these thoughts. And to understand this a little bit deeper, let's talk a little bit more about the neuroscience. Imagine these are two neurons right here, and they're connected, wiring there. Now, when two neurons connect, they send an electrical signal. That's how they communicate, right? So what is communication? Well, it's just language. Well, what is language? Well, language is just our words, right? So if we want to control and occupy this part of our mind, we've just got to get really disciplined and really good at choosing the words and the thoughts to put in that part of our mind, right? Actively place those thoughts, okay? We good there? That's the conscious mind. Okay, so let's continue on this. I'll speed up a little bit here. Now, every day we have 60,000 to 100,000 thoughts that go through our mind. They go through this process right here, right? You see the red line, we go through that pattern over and over and over. 90% of them are repeated thoughts from the day before, right? Again, that stored memory in the subconscious is just repeating things that you do over and over and over again, right? And then because of our negativity bias, 75% of those to 80% of those are negative, right? So what is that telling us? It's telling us that we're just wiring in habits over and over and over again that are dispositioned to be negative, right? So we have a lot of those thoughts going on in our brain, right? Thinking patterns. Now, because of that negative bias, if we're not actively or intentionally trying to control our thoughts and create the right kind of thinking patterns, undisciplined thinking will lead to negative thinking patterns, right? That's the negativity bias. And really, it's not even a negativity bias. It's like a survival bias. It's part of a primitive fight or flight response in our brains that is designed to keep us alive, right? So it looks for threats, and it's designed to avoid them or run away from them whenever possible, right? So we tend to develop an avoidance thinking or a subtractive thinking, which the way it manifests itself is, well, I can't try out for that team because I don't want to be cut, or I don't want to experience that kind of pain, or I can't go and learn a new skill or present in public because I don't want to embarrass myself or anything like that, right? So we have kind of this protective part of our brain that's looking out for us there, right? But if we're not training or being disciplined, we will develop, kind of this natural pattern will happen, right? Because we have so many of those thoughts going through over and over again, these neurons connect to each other. They create a neural pathway, which becomes a network. Now, the problem with the negative thinking is that it wires in to this part of our brain called the fight or flight response, right? So anytime we have thoughts of like, I can't do this, or I can't compete with those other athletes, or man, I really just stink at my sport or my event or my skill, it activates that part of the brain that is designed to fight or flight, right? The problem with that is our anxiety and our stress goes up. When our anxiety and stress goes up, cortisol goes through the body, goes through the brain, and our muscle tension goes up, and therefore our performance goes down. This literally is happening when people say, oh, I can't perform under pressure, or I choke under pressure, right? It's because they have a thinking pattern that activates this part of their brain and then sends them down this path of destruction, this path of bad thinking, which causes their performance to go down. Everybody follow me there? Okay. Good news is, if we can wire in the bad habits, we can also wire in the good habits, right? We can wire in new patterns. And how do we do that? We change our words, right? We have to control our thinking. We change our words to be more of an approach thinking, more of an additive thinking. In its simplest phrase, we'll talk about this a little bit later, but it's the language of I can do this, or I can compete with people. I do belong here, right? So we'll talk a little bit more about that. But as we start to develop these new thinking patterns, it wires in a new habit. I forgot to mention the bad habits I like to call reactive intelligence, right? The good habits, the good thinking patterns, I like to call proactive intelligence. But it's very intentional. It's proactive. Proactive, the definition of proactive is to create or to control a situation, right? So we want to create and control our thoughts, which then controls our performance, okay? Now, what's awesome about this part of the brain is as we develop these habits, it unlocks key pieces in the brain that are responsible for memory, responsible for spatial awareness, for learning, adaptive learning, and responsible for emotional regulation, right? So as a player, you can, well, I'll ask it this way. How many of you would like to have these tools unlocked while you're competing? All of us, right? Like this is what helps us perform our best, right? Our memory's unlocked, spatial awareness. We can see the court, we can see the field, right? We're learning. That means we have the ability to make adjustments, right? And then we're managing and controlling our emotion there, okay? So just in short, right, those thinking patterns enter our conscious mind. They get stored as memory. They tell the body what to do. There's basically two types of patterns: reactive intelligence, proactive intelligence, right? So if you want to unlock performance, we got to get really good at developing this, right? Okay, so let me tell a quick story to help illustrate this. I used to work in Alaska. I would go up there during the summer times. We would fish, and so I got dozens of bear stories. Okay, so I got to tell you this one bear story. I was standing at a table just like this. It was about 4 feet across, and I'm filleting fish. I'm chopping them up after the day. It was a whole bunch of salmon, just like this. And what's fun about AI is I told AI what the story was, and I had to create this image, and actually got pretty close to what actually happened. About 10 feet in front of me was the really thick Alaskan brush, right? You couldn't even see through it. It was so thick. And we had some loud music playing, which is pretty common. You want to kind of keep the animals away, but on this particular day, this guy got a little bit curious, and he came out of the brush, and I didn't see him until he stood up right on the other side of the table and looked me right in the eye. And I literally was within arm's reach of Yogi Bear trying to steal my picnic basket. And in that very moment, right, to sort of illustrate the reactive side of our brain, or that fight or flight response, my brain got hijacked. I was no longer in control. The fight or flight response was in control. I was either going to fight that bear or I was going to run away, right? I definitely wasn't going to fight the bear. So I backed up from the table and was gone in a flash. Now, how many of you know you're not supposed to run from a bear, right? It's like the worst thing you could do. And that's what I did. But I wasn't in control in that moment, right? My fight or flight response was in control. So I didn't even have a chance to think, don't run from the bear or stay calm, right? I just bolted, okay? Now, I got a chance to work up there for a few years and learned. So, well, let me finish the story. I ran to the lodge. It was about 40 yards away. Pretty convinced I would have beat Usain Bolt in a foot race in that moment. But went inside, got a gun, fired in the air. They don't like loud noises, so he scurried off into the woods. And I got to finish what I was doing. But because I didn't like that response, I started to study bears, and I started to learn more. Okay, how are you supposed to react to them? How are you supposed to respond to them, right? And I learned how to study bears. And later, I actually have a cool spot. We flew out to an island. It's called Chichikov Island, which is the most. It's an island that has the highest population of brown bears per square footage on this island, right? You can only get to it by plane or boat. And we went to this waterfall. It also happens to be like the most amazing salmon fishing ever, which is why all the bears go there, right? But there was a time where, and I didn't see all of them, but I was standing on a rock fishing into the waterfalls, and our pilot could see up the river and could see me, and he said at one time there were 9 brown bears, 9 grizzly bears. They were also fishing around me and our group at the same time. But the difference between this experience and this experience is I had learned and I had rewired my intelligence. I knew how to respond around grizzly bears. I knew how to react. I knew what signs would tell me if they were angry or aggressive, and if you're curious, like their hair stands up on their back, their head gets really low, right? So if you see those, you definitely should be prepared to fight. And so I had a more controlled, calm experience in that environment. Okay, so I just wanted to highlight kind of the two differences there. All right, so let's add some research to help illustrate what we're talking about. Number one predictor of success. There was a very cool study that was done with 1,000 kids across 40 years. Now, just for those in the research world, this is the type of research that is like the hardest to do. And because it's the hardest to do, it's funny. I got a PhD student back here. She's like nodding her head. She's like, yes, that's really hard to do. Those are the hardest ones to do. And the reason it's the hardest to do is because a lot of times you get a lot of attrition through a study. People will drop out. But they were able to track 1,000 kids for 40 years and track them every year and measure and try to predict what elements contributed to success. And one of the things that Dr. Goleman found or said was the strongest predictor of success by the time they got to into their 30s, right, was cognitive control. So more so than IQ, more so than their environment or the family situation they grew up in, it was the ability to control their thoughts, right? Control their mind. So that's why I help shape and illustrate how we can control the mind or how our brain works, because the number one predictor of success, and actually this says how well you do in life, and then you could substitute that with sport. How well you do in sport is going to be determined by how well you can develop these cognitive abilities, right? Okay, so how does that apply to sport? Let's explore that. And to explore that, let's throw up a math equation. So if you weren't already falling asleep, I'm definitely going to put you to sleep because we're going to do some math here. The sport performance is made up of these three things. The first thing is you got to have potential, right? Got to have the abilities, the skills, the potential to perform at any level, right? Then you got to put in all of the physical training. We got to add in the weight room and nutrition and sleep and all of the training, develop the skills, right? But really to unlock high performance and to become a true high performer, we have to be able to control or remove this interference part, right? And so if we went through and spent some time and I asked, we got some track and field guys right here. If I asked them to tell me all the distractions or the interference that comes up during a competition, they would say, well, it could be the weather, it could be my previous performance, it could be my coach and some of the things they're saying to me, it could be my parents, it could be the officials or a referee, we could go through the whole list, right? But being able to control and remove those interfering thoughts is going to help unlock the rest of your physical skills, right? Now, one thing I love about this is if you ask like how much of sport is contingent on either one of these, well, look, most of it's physical, no question, right? You got to get out there, run, compete, perform, right? 10% is mental, but this piece controls this piece, right? The mental skills, the mental strengths control the physical skills. They unlock the physical skills. So you can have all of the physical abilities in the world, and it means nothing unless you train the mind and you unlock those physical abilities, right? Talent without cognitive abilities, I like to use sports car analogy. It's like having a sports car that can go really fast without a driver, right? You can be great, but you're not going to go anywhere, right? The cognitive abilities are what's going to drive all that, right? Okay, so how do we remove interference? We wire proactive intelligence. We train our mind to think the right ways, right? I'll just share this really quick, right? This is the thinking patterns that we talked about. From a lot of my research and a lot of my work, there's 8 mental strengths you got to develop to build the right cognitive abilities to control your performance, right? So we're going to talk about one of them, and it's right here, the first one, learning, right? In short, how do we wire in that proactive intelligence? It starts with our words, right? The first mindset, learning mindset. This is pretty foundational because it's where we as athletes and coaches or parents or even just people performing, it's where we start to begin to believe that we can grow our abilities, grow our intelligence, and continue to learn and improve, right? Over long periods of time. It's where we start to understand that all of our experiences, whether they're failures, whether they're wins, losses, mistakes, executing skills well, it's where all of that becomes part of learning, becomes part of the process. Actually, to be totally candid, it becomes necessary and it's essential, right? So a lot of parents or coaches will ask me like, hey, how do I help my kids become gritty or become resilient or develop confidence? And a lot of times I'll say, let them fail. Let them lose games. Let them make mistakes. Let them take risks and learn what that's like. All of that is part of the learning process, right? It's part of development. Okay, so we good there? First mindset is a learning mindset. A lot of this actually comes from the research. Albert Bandura, this guy will go down. He passed away a couple years, but this guy will go down as like one of the legends of psychology because of a lot of his research and work. But unfortunately, he has to be dead for like 50 years before people remember how impactful you are, right? But his work, he was a Stanford professor, and then he actually influenced a ton of Carol Dweck's work. So if you've read the book Mindset, or if you heard of growth mindset versus fixed mindset, that's Carol Dweck's work. It really came from Bandura, but it all starts with this learning, which really is that ability to believe that you can do a thing, okay? So to help illustrate this, I'm going to tell you a sports story. After I finished my college career, I started competing professionally. I qualified for my first U.S. championship, okay? And I was thinking I was pretty hot stuff, and I was ready to perform, ready to compete. I'd been jumping pretty well. I'd been doing a lot of the mental training by this point, 4 or 5 years worth of mental training and physical training. And then this guy walks out onto the track. Name is Nick Heisong, 2000 Olympic gold medalist. And immediately I start to think, oh, I'm in trouble. And then this guy walked out. Tim Mack, 2004 Olympic gold medalist. And now I thought, oh, I'm really in trouble. And then this guy walked out. Derek Miles, 2008 Olympic silver medalist. And these were the guys that I was competing against. And really fast, I started to have thoughts like, oh boy, I don't belong here. These guys are really skilled, really talented. I can't compete with these guys, right? What kind of intelligence just got activated right there? The reactive side, right? And even as somebody who had been training my mind as much as I had, like still there were thoughts at the highest level. There were thoughts that showed up and started to impact me, right? So because I had been doing the mental training, I really quickly started to change my thinking patterns and started to remind myself, no, I qualified to be here. I can jump with these guys. I can compete, right? And so I switched my mindset, started to add in. So again, just to put it in more detail, the previous thinking patterns were full of self-doubt and lack of self-belief, right? So I had to change it and start to really believe that I can be there, I can compete, I belong with all those guys, right? Now, the way that competition unfolded is this guy won, but I did end up beating this guy, and I did end up beating this guy, so I was pretty proud of that. I finished 10th overall, which is like way down the list, but I was pretty pumped. But this guy won. But my point in illustrating this is that even at the highest level, elite athletes can have these thoughts that activate that reactive side of our mind. If I had stayed there, my performance certainly would have been a disaster, right? But I developed the skills, the ability to kind of switch my thinking patterns, okay? So now I'm going to walk through really quick here in like 2 minutes this first skill of self-belief, okay? So definition of self-belief, this is my definition, but it's essentially a strong self-assurance, right? That's believing in your own ability to execute a task, right? That's the action part of it. Knowing or hoping that it will lead to the best possible outcomes, right? Which would be the results, right? So a couple of key things. Confidence comes from the past. It really is as simple as what have I done? I have competed well. I had been to previous. So if I go back to my U.S. championship experience, where could I draw my confidence from? Well, I had been in NCAA championships. I had been in other big competitions. I had jumped high before, right? So therefore, there I had evidence from the past that tells me I can be confident, right? That evidence triggers this I can do mentality. It triggers that self-belief, right? So because I had evidence of previous successful experience, I believed I could do that again and do that in the future, right? So that's the essence of self-belief. It's as simple as I can do. And it could be I can compete, I can perform well, I belong, right? I can execute these skills to jump high, leading to good results, right? Okay, everybody follow me there? What's fun about this is when we go through this pattern, it kind of creates this cyclical pattern of self-belief, right? I believe I can go do it, I act, I see some good results, therefore I get confidence, which then brings me back into more self-belief, okay? That's the first skill. Now, how do we build this? How do we control this? Well, the number one tool is our language, our words, right? We call them performance statements. A good performance statement has a few pieces. It's specifically focused on a task. It's in the present moment, it's instructive, and it's full of confidence, okay? So I'm going to give you an example. If you want to write this down, you can. But the way I would train a player or an athlete, this is an example of, let's say you're a basketball player and you're playing defense. This is what I would have them work through in their mind, the language I would have them build. I am a great defensive player, right? I can stay in front of anybody, right? And then I would have them build out a dozen or so of these confident building I am performance statements, right? I am great at this, I am great at this, I am great at this. The brain loves specificity. So the more detailed you can get to the specific task, it isn't just so much like I'm a great basketball player. It is more about what makes you a great basketball player. What are the specific skills, the specific tasks, and even beyond that, what are your best strengths that make you a great basketball player, right? And put I am great in front of all of those. Then we would build out a series of I can statements, okay? And then we would give them specific cues to execute those tasks, right? So a player would be saying, I'm going to crowd his space, I'm going to stay in front, I'm going to move my feet. These are cues they're saying in their head, in their mind, while they're performing, okay? Okay, so that's the skill of self-belief. So here's the takeaways, right? We walk through wiring proactive intelligence, unlocks our performance. You can control your mind by choosing your words. First skill is self-belief and learning, and the performance statements are how we build that self-belief. So if you're a player, go take it, go apply it. If you're a coach or a parent, go and teach your kids this, teach your kids and athletes this so they can start to apply it. Shameless plug, if you want to continue to do this, right, we started a technology company and we want people to come and train with us, right? We only started last summer, but what this QR code will essentially just allow you to get in touch with us or allow you to for us to contact you. But we have an app that's a full mental training performance app, measures your mental strength, it tracks your mental strength. We have 50 mental strength training programs, and then access to our kind of live group trainings. So come train with us if you want to keep putting in the mental reps. I'm gonna wrap up there and start to take questions. Okay, any questions?
Can you highlight the performance statements have different elements? What were they again? Task was the first one.
Yep, right there.
Present moment.
Specific task, present moment, instructive. I should add into that quote, detailed, like very specific details, and full of confidence. Any other questions?
Should motivate for teenagers or adults, or what's the age group?
Yeah, so the age group is 12 to 18, but we really tried to build it to provide world-class mental training to young kids, to young players, right? At the pro levels, they can go and hire people to come in and train them, right? Here at BYU, at the Division I levels, they can go hire people to come in and train them. But at the high school level, in the sports world, the youth level sports world, they just don't have the same level of access. So we designed the whole thing to really be catered to that. Individual training for individuals, and then if you're a coach of a team and you want to plug it in for your whole team, it's designed and built to support teams. In fact, I have a friend back here. His name is Noah. Noah is a coach and a parent, but he's also a user of Motivate. Anything you want to share with the group?
I'll touch on something I'm a former athlete, teammate of Bobby. I was a decathlete. I coach now in track and field, coach speed and agility for random teams and my own kids. And I'm a parent to some hopefully high-achieving athletes. We put a lot into their athletics, from physical trainings to very skill-specific trainings. My son's a wide receiver, and apparently he needs a wide receiver-specific coach. I didn't have that as a high school football player, right? Just went out and did whatever the coach and the team did. But he has a wide receiver-specific coach that's helping him make great gains in that department. That being said, it's all about consistency, whether it be in the weight room, on the field, or in your position. Soccer players. Any soccer players? No. Football? What do we got under? Runners? Runner? Okay. Sports. Name y'all your sport.
I'm biking.
What?
Mountain biking.
Mountain biking, okay. Volleyball? Basketball? Dance? Okay. Awesome. So think about your sport and how many times you're doing the same repetitive thing over and over and over again, right? Will that repetitive thing ever stop in the sport you're doing? Not until you stop the sport, right? So I like to talk about consistency being key, from your strength program to your tactical side to running the same repeat sprinter. Decathlete. Oh, decathlete. Okay, right on. So doing the exact same jump, shot put, all that over and over again, right? So mental reps. We're taking these reps. There hasn't been a way yet for someone to get consistent mental reps. And that's what Motivate's done for my athletes that I coach, and for my own kids, and for the groups we formed that have this in their high schools. Is now with Motivate, they're getting a simple app-based format to get mental reps in. And as we stay consistent with those, then we really lock into this next level of mental performance. Where in the past, has anyone been to like a night where they invited a psychologist in and you got some tips and tricks on how to have better mental performance? Okay, great. But one-time thing, maybe you took some notes. Where are those notes now? Motivate is a simple formula that's been put together to train 2 to 3 minutes a day to get a tool, a trick, a new habit that you consistently do over and over and over again. Just like if I were a soccer player, I'm going to touch that soccer ball 1,000 times every single day, and that's never going to stop. So consistency is key. I love it, and it applies to mental reps, and that's what Motivate can bring to our youth athletes today. That has definitely been missing. One more minute. So something I've learned personally from Motivate as a decathlete, something Motivate teaches is this formula of training your strengths to weaknesses at a 3-to-1 ratio. And as a decathlete, my shot put was my weakness, but I kept working so hard at it to try and get an extra foot on that throw. And I probably should have spent more time working on one of my strengths, which was long jump, which I moved from a 21-foot jumper to a 23-foot jumper. And if I put more effort there, who knows, I could have been a 25-foot jumper and scored how many more points? A lot, rather than a foot in the shot put, right? So Motivate taught me that, and I wish I had that skill as an athlete, that I should work on my strengths at a 3-to-1 ratio to my weaknesses. So get in touch with us, guys, on Motivate. It's been amazing for the kids that have used it so far.
Awesome, thanks, Noah. We're down to like 1 minute. If there's any other questions I could take.
Is Motivate designed for the athlete to use on their own, separate from a parent?
Yes.
You said there's a team ability
Yes.
for that too?
Yeah.
So like coach could see things that are going on?
Yep.
Okay.
Training progress, scores. So just if you're curious, come talk to us. We'll tell you all about it. Any questions about what we talked about? We all good on we can control our mind, choose our words, unlock our performance, ready to go? Okay, awesome. I'll let you guys go because we're at time, but appreciate you.
Thank you.
Thank you.